Good morning. I wanted to say a few words about this very unusual piece we're about to play. It was written under very strange circumstances. During World War II, the composer Olivier Messiaen was drafted and became a nurse in the army, and he was captured almost immediately by the Germans and brought to a prisoner of war camp, which nowadays would be in Poland. And in that camp, he was seen as somewhat of a celebrity, and one of the German guards made it possible for him to have staff music so that he could write music while he was there. And this same guard also arranged for the prisoners who were musicians in the camp to get instruments, including a cello with 3 strings. And Messiaen is known as a mystical Catholic, and from a young age. And he says that this composition, which was written for cello, violin, clarinet, and piano, was inspired by the book of Revelation, the revelation of John. And in this revelation, the mighty angel descends onto the earth and declares that there shall be time no longer. But at the day of the trumpet of the seventh angel, the mystery of God shall be consummated. And the directions that the composer gave for this particular movement, which is just for cello and piano, was that it should be infinitely slow, ecstatic, and majestic.
Good morning. My name is Belote. I'm a member of the Worship Associates Ministry here at the church. And I'd like to welcome you here this morning. Whoever you are, whomever you love, however you arrived at this beloved place, you are welcome here. Just a reminder, I think everybody's participating. It's mass indoors at the church during coffee hour out in the courtyard. That will be mask optional. Also, at noon, for those watching online, we will have the small group social. And I'd like to remind you to please silence your phones or any other noise makers. Again, welcome this morning.
Let us sing our first hymn of the morning. Our first hymn is number 1022, and I invite you to rise in body or spirit. This hymn, it says that it was inspired by a Georgia Sea Islands spiritual, and that it's to be sung with a calypso feel. So I want to challenge you to get into it. And if you lose track of the words, just keep on singing. And this is going to be a whole lot. Be open and have fun with it. That's the message of this morning. Be open and have fun with it. And we are just going to do, it is a hymn of infinite challenges, and we're going to make it a little bit easier by just doing the English as it's written. So we're not going to sing the Spanish today. That's a whole nother level of challenge. So English verses only.
Like snakes, open the window, let the dove fly in. Baby is a crying like her heart will break. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, children. Open the window now. Open the window, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Neighbors lock the doors, build fences so high. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Don't feel to cover on the other side. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, children. Open the window now. Open the window, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Borders round the country, borders round the sky. Open the window, let the dove fly in. The only borders close you in the heart round your mind. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, children. Open the window now. Open the window, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Some people have money, some people have none. Open the window, let the dove fly in. What's the use of money if your heart's gone numb? Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, children. Open the window now. Open the window, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly in. This big old world is in a great big mess. Open the window, let the dove
Our call to worship this morning is adapted from UU minister Clark Dewey Wells. O Spirit of life and hope, we turn our minds and hearts again toward Thee. Awaken us again to the mysteries that humble us. Remind us again of the realities that orient us. Challenge us again with the truths that judge and guide us. Inspire us again with the beauty that informs and ravishes us. Awaken us to the love that nurtures us, to the fellowship that sustains us, and to the creativity that heightens and deepens and reorders our living, that we may give ourselves in honesty and openness to the larger life before us. So may it be. Come, let us worship together. If you would join me in reading the words for the lighting of our chalice this morning. We receive fragments of holiness, glimpses of eternity, brief moments of insight. Let us gather them up for the precious gifts that they are, and renewed by their grace, move boldly into the unknown.
The music of Gabriel Fauré was described as austere mysticism. He wrote at the end of his life his credo, which was, "The chief responsibility of the artist is to remind his fellow human beings just how beautiful life is. Otherwise, they tend to forget." And in this particular song, written to the poetry of Romain Bussin, the first several lines go like this. "In sleep made sweet by a vision of you, I dreamed of happiness, fervent illusion. Your eyes were softer, your voice pure and ringing. You shone like a sky that was lit by the dawn."
Each week, we hold a time in our service for sharing the joys and the sorrows that we bring with us into this community. It's during this time, if you've come with either a significant personal joy or a significant sorrow, that you're invited to come forward, place a stone in the water bowl, share your name, and then briefly, in a sentence or two, share your joy or your sorrow. Let us enter into this time of trust, this tender place. And if there are any joys and sorrows, you can come down the side aisles and then return.
Hi, my name is Dawn Carter. I was placing this stone for the Redwine family. I got to know Rebecca Redwine a couple of years ago working together, and her husband passed away on Friday after a successful rescue of their son from the riptide at the beach this week, but he was not able to survive that himself. And I just want to, my heart goes out to her for the loss of her partner and to her two sons, 8 and 6, who've now lost their dad. So please keep them in your hearts.
I am Flo Benson, and I'm here to share two joys today. My granddaughter, Nicole Benson Meidel, who at one time was a member here during her high school years and assisted in child care. She's here with her husband, Chris, and 11-month-old Twyla. And my second joy is that today is my birthday, and today I'm 91 years old. Thank you.
I'm Mark Filling. This is my wife, Susan Heyman. I have a yearly sadness that 9 years ago today I lost my wife of 35 years to cancer. So that's this. And then, of course, I met Susan, so that's my joy.
Thank you. My name's Betsy Yerrison, and it is actually my great joy to be here in the town where my parents met in 1938, without which there wouldn't have been no me.
All right.
Final stone is placed for all those joys and sorrows that we hold in our hearts. I invite you to join with me in a few moments of meditation. Spirit of life, source of our being and our becoming, be with us in the fullness of ourselves and in the fullness of this community. Be with us in those who struggle from illness or recover from injury. Be with us in the trials of our lives as well as their successes, in troubling times as well as joy. Be with us in the comings and goings, the travel of summer, the visits of loved ones. Be with us in the years and the generations and the memories and the traditions and the communities and the art of our lives and of our world. Open us each to one another. Open us to the lovely stirrings of the youngest and to the wonderful wisdom of age. Open us as well to that spirit that upholds life and sustains us. Let us mingle these prayers with our own personal prayers as we hold before us a time of silent meditation. I invite you to be still with me for a time. Amen. At the heart of this service is the idea that the Spirit can come and that experience can come in many forms in the music of Messiaen and Fauré, or in the songs of Georgia Sea Island Spiritual talking about opening the window, letting that dove fly in, that the Spirit can come in the words of Emerson, or even in the appearance of a bird. And the Spirit can come as well in pagan chant, which is what we're going to do as our sung meditation. I invite you to open to number 389, gathered here in the mystery of this hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power. Spirit, draw near. I invite you to open to 389 and follow the lead as we sing together.
We'll sing it a couple times in unison, and then do it as a maybe three-part round.
if you'll open your hymnals to number 531, we're going to have a responsive reading. And I invite you to read the italicized letters. Just so you know, I'll be reading both parts so those people watching online can hear what the whole thing is. Let us learn the revelation of all nature and thought, that the highest dwells within us, that the sources of nature are in our own minds. As there is no screen or ceiling between our heads and the infinite heavens, so there is no bar or wall in the soul where we, the effect, cease, and God, the cause, begins. I am constrained every moment to acknowledge a higher origin for events than the will I call mine. There is deep power in which we exist and whose beatitude is accessible to us. Every moment when the individual feels invaded by it, is memorable. It comes to the lowly and simple. It comes to whosoever will put off what is foreign and proud. It comes as insight. It comes as serenity and grandeur. The soul's health consists in the fullness of its reception. Forever and ever, the influx of this better and more universal self is new and unsearchable. Within us is the soul of the whole, the wise silence, the universal beauty to which every part and particle is equally related, the eternal one. When it breaks through our intellect, it is genius. When it breathes through our will, it is virtue. When it flows through our affections, it is love. We're grateful for the bounty we have received, and joyfully we will give from our abundance for this morning's offering.
So let me tell you a little bit about my claim to fame, which is also my claim to shame. My claim to fame is that I once had a short essay published in an anthology that included pieces by several well-known real authors, including most famously Barbara Ehrenreich. I know that's not much of a claim to fame. But my claim to shame is that my essay was awful. The tone was all wrong, the writing was arrogant, the essay didn't flow, and it wasn't coherent, and I was wrong. I'm embarrassed by it, and the only saving grace is that it was published in a very obscure book and is thankfully out of print. So I don't brag that I was published in a collection with Barbara Ehrenreich. I avoid mentioning it. That was a joke. I kind of avoid mentioning it. But if you're not familiar with Barbara Ehrenreich, this is my lead-in, let me tell you about her. Barbara Ehrenreich received an education in the sciences. She studied chemistry and theoretical physics as an undergrad, and then received a PhD in cell biology. She then became an author. Her writings, more than 20 books in all, explored feminism, class, politics, culture, and social justice. She's perhaps most famous for her 2001 book, Nickel and Dimed, which is kind of a muckraking work of journalism exploring class in America. Barbara Ehrenreich is deeply humanistic, passionately progressive, and she values reason, rationality, and logic. But she has a secret, or rather, she had a secret. At the age of 72, she published a book called Living with a Wild God. The book describes how at the age of 14, she began to have powerful mystical experiences. You've heard of Moses and the burning bush, right? In which a bush appears to be ablaze by a fire that doesn't consume it, and the divine speaks through that vision. Well, for Barbara Ehrenreich, it wasn't a bush, but a tree, the first time she had this experience. But then, as she continued to have it, eventually it became everything. She describes it this way: the world flamed into life. It was a furious encounter with a living substance that was coming at me through all things at once. Nothing could contain it. Everywhere, inside and out, the only condition was overflow. And these mystical states happened regularly to Barbara Ehrenreich throughout her adolescence, and they even continued, although perhaps in a little bit more muted form, for the rest of her life, up until the present day. But it wasn't until her 20th book, published at age 72, that the author actually revealed and explored these experiences. So let me put this kind of starkly here. Barbara Ehrenreich's public persona is that of a deeply humanistic, scientific materialist, rationalist skeptic, progressive atheist feminist activist. And over the course of nearly 60 years, she had powerful, life-changing, and pervasive mystical experiences that she kept hidden from other people and mostly kept hidden from herself. Who else finds this interesting? In a sermon, Reverend Daniel Harper describes the hallmarks of mystical experience this way: it's an experience that's difficult to put into words. It changes the person who has the experience. The experience gives knowledge of some deep and abiding force or presence in the universe, often a sense of oneness and unity. And such an experience ultimately cannot be explained, but nor can it be explained away. So how is it that we might open to mysticism, and what might that mean? There are those who've said that mystical experiences occur randomly, that there's nothing that we could possibly do to create them or bring them about. They happen in their own time, or they don't happen. And that's both true and not true. Sometimes mystical experiences do just seem to come randomly, as they did to Barbara Ehrenreich as a 14-year-old. But mystical experiences also appear to come frequently to those who experience trauma, such as near-death experiences. Jill Bolte Taylor writes about her own mystical awakening coming as a result of a near-fatal stroke. Needless to say, I don't recommend pursuing this path. Another avenue is spiritual practice. Forms of meditation, perhaps accompanied by breath work and chanting, can produce altered states of consciousness and lead to a mystical experience. And still another option, if we're being honest about all the options, is the use of psychoactive chemicals. Great philosophers like William James, Aldous Huxley, the Beatles, happy birthday Paul McCartney, all explored the use of brain-altering chemicals. And I believe it was Michael Pollan who wrote that every single culture around the world, except for one, engages in the cultural use of psychoactive chemicals for altered states. The one exception, an indigenous tribe living above the Arctic Circle, where nothing producing those chemicals can grow. That culture must have missed out or something. Those are a few options for having a mystical experience: random chance, profound trauma, intense spiritual practice, or chemicals. But it turns out that there's also another additional way: the practice of awareness, attention, noticing, and playful curiosity. Let me explain. Back in January, February, and March, I had a lovely sabbatical in which I set out to explore mystical experiences. And part of that sabbatical involved going to an academic conference held at Rice University on this sort of stuff that I'm talking about this morning. And one of the keynote lectures was given by a man named Edwin May. I don't have time to go into his backstory, but his talk had to do with psychic phenomena. And actually, I was probably least interested to hear his talk, but it turned out that his was one of the best, because one of the points he made was this. He said, "I believe we are all just a little bit psychic." I believe we're all just a little bit psychic, he said. And then he gave a handful of examples. Have you ever been thinking of someone, and then seconds later, that very person calls you on the phone? A few nods. Or have you ever had the phone ring, and I'm talking like pre-caller ID days, and you just know who that person is before you pick up the phone? Or have you ever had a sensation that a loved one was either passed away or was in danger, even though you were many, many miles away? Or have you ever felt an intuitive feeling about another person or a situation, or made a decision based on incomplete and illogical information that turned out to be a good decision? Or have you ever dreamed something that then came true? Or, I love this, this is the last example he gave. Have you ever noticed that your pet seems to know something's about to happen before it actually happens? Edmund Way would say probably your pet's a little psychic. I would say, based on the heads that I see nodding gently, some people nodding and looking around, that a lot of us have had these experiences, or at least know someone who's had them. So maybe we're all just a little bit psychic, or maybe we're all just a little bit mystic. And that's something that we can notice and pay attention to and regard with playful curiosity. It's a feeling that can actually open us to a wider view of the world. Consider this quote by academic Jeffrey Kripal. Physicists, he writes, physicists go on and on about big bangs, ghost universes, a multiverse, multiple dimensions, entangled telepathic particles, spooky action at a distance, God particles, non-locality, retrocausation, and even tiny invisible strings. But we rational humanists, we allergically avoid all our remarkable stuff, all those religious experiences that seem to suggest that quantum effects do scale up to human experience, all our mystical interconnectedness, all those entangled people who somehow instantly know what is happening to a loved one 1,000 miles away or foresee what is about to happen. Instead, we go on and on about how we're all locked into our historical contexts, how religion is only about dubious power or bad politics or evolutionary adaptations, how our fantastic stories are all just anecdotal statistical flukes or perceptual delusions. He's asking us not to discount the remarkable. So what? When I started as the minister of this church, I gave a talk on a Thursday evening about mystical experience. I started with Emerson, which Bill read a little bit of. There is a deep power in which we exist and whose beatitude is accessible to us. Within us is the soul of the whole, the wise silence, the universal beauty to which every part and particle is equally related, the eternal one. And I moved on to William James, and then came to the presence and talked about contemporary thinking about mystical experiences. The response was that after this talk, several people came to me asking for there to be a follow-up session. And I kind of blew them off, but they pursued me, and pursued me, and pursued me until I finally relented, and I'm so glad that we did, because we held this session 4 months later where a dozen people in the church, a dozen members of the church came in an evening, shared their mystical experiences with each other. Years later, I gave a sermon talking about my own mystical experience around the time of my father's death. And I put out an invitation for people to share their own experiences with me so that I might include them in a sermon. And then I wound up with way too much material because 23 members contacted me, sharing their experiences. And whenever I'm invited to guest preach at other churches, the sermon that I always choose to give is some version of one of these sermons about mysticism. And I tell that congregation where I'm guest preaching to get together and talk to each other about this stuff and see what happens. There is a sense in which the human is two. Let me explain what that means. That we're all two. On one level, we're ourselves with our lives and our families and our jobs and our identities and our culture and our historical context and our preferences and our language. And we're also, at the same time, spiritual beings existing in a state of quantum entanglement and mystical interconnectedness with each other and with everything that is throughout all time and space. The human is two. Our principles suggest that when they say that we're, on one hand, persons with inherent worth and dignity, and that we're part of an interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. The human is two and somehow also one. I think in this sermon what I'm really hoping for is a reminder of the fullness of human experience and I mean the fullness of human experience. And somehow churches and communities and groups become a little more alive, a little more lively, when we can bring both parts of ourselves, all parts of ourselves, to that community. Jack Kornfield, the contemporary Buddhist author and teacher, speaks of this two-ness when he writes, "We are spiritual beings incarnated into human form. We need to remember our Buddha nature as well as our zip code. We're creatures of this paradox." And so my charge is to notice, to pay attention, to engage with the fullness of yourself with playful curiosity. And to, as Jack Kornfield says, go forth remembering both your Buddha nature and your zip code. Amen, and blessed be. The song that I want to sing is number 4 in our hymnal. That's going to be our closing hymn of the morning. I first sung this song in Maine, on the coast of Maine, at the Universalist Ferry Beach Camp and Conference Center, where I spent at age 16 a summer working. And this hymn made me think of, with it being, summertime, and with my social media feed being full of lots of pictures of people at the beach, I thought we might want to end with this song about bringing our spirit to the sea. It's a song that has a little bit of the spirit in it, as well as a little bit of the zip code. So combining that human as two into one. So I'm going to invite you to rise in body or in spirit. And the one thing that I want to say about it is that it is besides all the other things that I've just said about it, is that it ends with kind of this, usually as we sing hymns, most hymns kind of resolve at the end and hit a note that kind of makes you feel like, oh, that line is done. And this one, it really doesn't. It kind of ends with a note that makes everything feel sort of unfinished and waiting to break forth. And that's on purpose that I've chosen this hymn, because that's the unfinished sort of sense that I want us to go forth with. So let's hit that note that doesn't really conclude.
If you'll join with me as we extinguish the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And for our closing song, Shalom, If you're comfortable holding hands, put your hands down by your side. If you prefer not to hold hands, simply cross your heart.